Chapter 1. Every empire advanced without resistance, until Earth's lone Dreadnought refused to move. Silence reached places light never could. Commander Sorel had spent 43 standard years crossing forgotten lanes between dead stars, and he had learned that silence in space was never empty. It carried stories. Some were buried beneath shattered moons. Others drifted forever inside abandoned stations whose crews had vanished long before their distress calls reached anyone alive. Dead Space Theta 7 was different. Nothing belonged there. No trade routes crossed it. No colonies had ever survived its radiation storms. Even gravity seemed uncertain, as though the universe itself hesitated before stepping inside. The survey cruiser Asterion entered without ceremony. Its engines dimmed. Its scanners whispered instead of sang. The crew spoke less than usual. Even the youngest officers felt it. Something was waiting, not hunting, waiting. Sorel stood alone on the observation deck, 6 long fingers resting lightly against the transparent alloy overlooking the darkness. His silver eyes followed streams of frozen dust drifting through ancient starlight. He wasn't afraid, not yet. Experience had taught him that fear came after understanding, never before. "Commander," Navigation Officer Thalen said quietly, "passive scan complete. Anything?" A pause, then another. The kind of pause professionals made when they hoped they had made a mistake. "There is one object. Natural." "No." Sorel finally looked over his shoulder. The bridge had gone still. Every officer stared at the central display. The object floated almost perfectly motionless, half buried inside clouds of frozen debris. Length, nearly 8 kilometers. Hull composition, unknown. Power signature, none. Life signs, none. Age estimate. The computer hesitated before displaying its answer. Approximately 317 years. Someone quietly exhaled. Sorel stepped closer. Magnify. The image sharpened. The ship emerged from darkness, one impossible detail at a time. Its armor wasn't polished. It wasn't damaged either. It simply looked old. The kind of old that remembered things civilizations tried very hard to forget. Its surface carried thousands of tiny repairs made by hand rather than machine. Some plates were different colors. Others had been welded together with obvious care instead of factory precision. This wasn't a warship abandoned after battle. It was a home that had survived too many winters. Then Sorel noticed the emblem, half hidden beneath centuries of dust. A blue circle, one white line crossing it, 3 small stars. His blood ran cold. "No," Thalen looked confused. "You recognize it?" Sorel stepped closer until the display filled his vision. "I shouldn't." No one answered, because every officer knew what that meant. History had declared the symbol erased. Entire libraries agreed it never truly existed. It belonged to one civilization, humanity, a species officially listed as extinct almost 300 years earlier. The archives claimed they had destroyed themselves during the collapse wars. Some records blamed artificial intelligence. Others blamed civil war. A few blamed something much older. None agreed. All ended the same way. Humanity disappeared. Children learned the story in school. Professors repeated it. Governments accepted it. The matter was closed. Until now. Sorel stared at the impossible emblem. "It can't be," the ship answered. A single light appeared. Tiny, faint. One observation window. Nobody moved. Another light, then another. Like distant candles waking inside a forgotten cathedral. The bridge alarms remained silent. No weapons, no engines, just lights. The communications officer swallowed. "Commander, I see them." The ancient vessel slowly rotated. Not under engine power. Just enough for its name to emerge beneath layers of dust. The letters were faded, some nearly gone. Yet still readable. EHS Perseverance. The silence aboard Asterion became almost painful. Then every speaker throughout the ship crackled. Static, ancient, weak. 3 centuries crossing the darkness. The transmission broke apart before rebuilding itself. Another burst. Anion. The crew leaned forward. "Hears." The voice was human. Old recordings preserved in museums had captured the language, but none living had ever heard a human speak. It sounded softer than expected. Tired, yet strangely steady. "Please identify yourselves." Silence. Then one final sentence. "The children deserve to know whether they finally made it." Nobody breathed. Communications Officer Yaren stared at his console. "Commander!" His voice shook. "The transmission is live." Sorel looked slowly toward him. "That's impossible." "I know, no." Sorel's eyes returned to the drifting giant outside. "I mean literally impossible. 317 years. No civilization maintained a continuous transmission that long. No reactor lasted, no crew survived, no biology ignored time itself. No, impossible." He straightened. "Prepare boarding team." Several officers turned immediately. "Commander, if someone is alive over there," he didn't finish. He didn't need to. The docking corridor opened with a sound like an old tree bending in winter. Air escaped, warm, fresh, impossible. Sorel stepped inside first. 4 security officers followed. None raised their weapons. Something about the place made violence feel wrong. The corridor lights flickered gently overhead, not emergency lights. Home lights, soft yellow. The walls carried scratches, children's drawings, tiny handprints preserved beneath clear protective coating. Someone had written names directly onto the metal using faded black ink. Lena, Jonas, Mila, Elias, thousands of names, different handwriting, different generations, each carefully dated, year 18, year 43, year 112, year 201, year 289. One officer whispered, "These aren't memorials." Cyril nodded slowly. "They're birthdays." The silence changed. It no longer felt abandoned. It felt lived in. Further inside, they found bicycles, wooden toys, books repaired dozens of times, paintings of blue oceans, crayon drawings showing children standing beneath unfamiliar skies. Every picture showed the same thing, a blue planet. One officer stopped walking. "Commander ahead." Sunlight, real sunlight, impossible aboard a drifting warship. They entered an enormous chamber. No one spoke. Gardens stretched beneath artificial skies, fruit trees, vegetables, flowers, birds, actual birds. Children ran between pathways, laughing, as though discovering alien visitors happened every afternoon. They froze only after noticing Cyril. Curious eyes watched from behind fruit trees. A little girl stepped forward first. She couldn't have been older than 7. Dark hair. Gray jacket patched at both elbows. She looked up at Cyril without fear. "You're late." The words hit harder than any weapon. Cyril knelt slowly. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "We've been waiting." Before he could answer, someone else spoke. Not loudly, calmly, with absolute certainty. "You kept the appointment." Every head turned. She stood at the end of the garden path. Tall, straight-backed, gray streaks through dark hair. A weathered navy coat. Its sleeves had been repaired countless times. Old rank insignia remained carefully polished. Captain Mara Voss. She looked neither surprised nor relieved, simply ready. She walked toward Cyril without hesitation. Every child instinctively stepped aside, not because they feared her, because they trusted her. When she finally stopped before him, the silence seemed to settle around her like an old friend. Her eyes carried exhaustion older than nations, yet they never lowered. She studied Cyril carefully, then spoke words that none aboard Asterion would ever forget. "Tell me, did humanity finally remember why we left?" No greeting, no introduction, only that question. Cyril opened his mouth. Nothing came, because he didn't know. Nobody knew. History had never mentioned anyone leaving. It only spoke of extinction. Mara understood immediately. "I thought so." She looked briefly toward the children playing again among the gardens. They deserved a better answer. Thousands of light years away, inside the crystalline halls of the Varric Dominion, the emergency transmission reached the Imperial Council. The oldest ministers barely looked up. One laughed. "A human signal?" Another waved dismissively. "Someone manufactured antique propaganda. The species destroyed itself. The archives are clear. Ignore it." Within minutes, the matter was archived under historical fraud investigations. No fleet launched, no concern remained. Humanity belonged in museums, not among the stars. Far beyond Dominion space, another civilization received the same signal, the Carefin Ascendancy. Unlike the Varric, nobody laughed. An elderly archivist dropped the recording crystal. It shattered across the floor. The room fell silent. The High Curator whispered only 3 words. "Seal the observatories." No one questioned him. Ancient vaults were opened beneath the capital. Documents unseen for centuries emerged. Each carried identical warnings. Never follow human signals. Never approach drifting human vessels. And above all, never awaken what follows them. Young officers exchanged nervous looks. What follows them? The old curator closed the final archive. I prayed history had forgotten. Back aboard the Perseverance, Cyril walked beside Mara through corridors alive with quiet purpose. Nothing felt desperate. People repaired pipes. Teachers instructed children. Engineers maintained ancient systems with loving patience. Everyone smiled. Everyone worked. Nobody asked for rescue. It confused him. "You've survived 3 centuries. 317 years. You counted. We counted everything." She stopped beside a large observation window overlooking endless stars. "We had to." Cyril studied her profile. "You don't act like survivors." Mara smiled faintly. "We aren't." "No, we're guardians." The answer settled between them. Heavy, unfinished. Cyril looked toward the distant darkness outside. "Guarding what?" She remained silent, not refusing. Waiting, as though someone else should answer first. An elderly woman approached slowly along the corridor, her back curved with age. Her hands trembled, but her eyes, they looked impossibly clear. Every child they passed bowed their head respectfully. Mara did the same. "So this is her," Cyril whispered. "The captain?" Mara shook her head gently. "No." "Then who is she?" Mara's voice became almost reverent. "The ninth keeper." The old woman stopped before Cyril. She smiled kindly. I wondered if anyone outside still listened. Cyril inclined his head. "My name is Commander Cyril, I know." "You know me? No." She looked beyond him, as if remembering faces separated by centuries. "I know why you're here." Cyril frowned. "I don't." Her smile deepened sadly. "No, you don't." Without another word, she reached into the pocket of her faded coat and handed Mara a tiny metal key. Not electronic, not coded. Just a simple key. Mara's face changed. Fear. For the first time. Real fear. What happened? Mara whispered. The old woman looked toward the stars beyond the glass. Her answer was barely audible. They found us. At that exact moment, every light aboard the Perseverance dimmed. Not failed. Bowed. Deep beneath the ship, something enormous awakened. Not engines. Older. Much older. The walls vibrated once. Just once. Then every sensor aboard both ships screamed simultaneously. The impossible had finally been confirmed. The drifting human vessel was not alone. Hidden beneath the dead star itself, something nearly the size of a moon had just answered the ship's presence, and it had been waiting even longer than humanity. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The awakening beneath the silent star, the alarms did not sound like machines. They sounded like frightened voices. Every console aboard the Asterion lit crimson as impossible readings flooded across the displays. Gravitational distortions rippled through Dead Space Theta 7. The dead star beneath the Perseverance no longer behaved like a dying sun. It was moving, not through space, through something deeper. Commander Sorel stood frozen before the observation window as the darkness beneath the ancient star slowly unfolded into impossible geometry. Vast metallic structures emerged from beneath layers of frozen stellar matter, each larger than continents, arranged in perfect circles around a point no scanner could identify. His tactical officer swallowed hard. Commander, those aren't natural formations, I know. They're ships. Serral looked again. No. His voice was barely a whisper. They're docks. Captain Maravas closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she looked every bit as tired as the centuries resting on her shoulders. The key came too early, she murmured. The elderly woman beside her, the ninth keeper, Eleanor Voss, rested one fragile hand against the cold steel wall. No, Eleanor answered softly. It came exactly when it always would. Mara turned. You knew this day would arrive, Eleanor smiled sadly. I've known since I was 6 years old. Far beyond the dead system, hyperspace trembled. Across hundreds of sectors, navigation arrays detected a signal older than every government still alive. Military networks classified it as impossible. Ancient observatories recognized it immediately. It was not a distress beacon, it was a clock, and it had just reached 0. 3 hours later, the first fleet arrived. No dramatic battle music announced them, no triumphant charge. Reality simply folded. One by one, enormous black warships emerged from hyperspace until they covered half the visible sky. 4,000 vessels, perfect formation. Weapons armed before their engines cooled. At their center drifted the command carrier, Judgment of Ashes. Commander Kale Riss stood on its bridge without speaking. He wasn't looking at the human ship. He was looking at the dead star beneath it. His first officer waited. Finally, sir, Kale answered without moving. My grandmother used to tell me stories. The bridge remained silent. About humans? Yes, another officer laughed nervously. Children's stories? Kale slowly shook his head. My grandmother survived the border fires. Nobody interrupted again. When I was young, I asked why our people never explored this region. He finally looked toward the growing image of the Perseverance. She told me something I've never forgotten. He took a slow breath. Never mistake quiet humans for defeated humans. The dangerous ones stop speaking before history notices they have disappeared. The bridge suddenly felt much colder. Back aboard the Perseverance, children continued harvesting vegetables beneath artificial sunlight. One little boy chased a bird through the gardens. A teacher laughed. Life continued. Outside, 4,000 warships surrounded them. Serral couldn't understand it. Why aren't they afraid? Mara smiled gently. They've lived with fear for 9 generations. She watched the children. Eventually, you stop feeding it. A communication request arrived. Commander Kale appeared across every display. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't threatening. He looked concerned. This is Commander Kale Reyes of the Coalition Defensive Fleet. He paused after seeing Mara. Recognition flashed across his face. Not recognition of her. Recognition of her uniform. I request immediate communication. Mara nodded once. Granted. Kale studied her carefully. You carry the old insignia. Yes. I hoped I'd never see it. Serral frowned. You know this symbol. Kale ignored him. Instead, he asked Mara one question. Has the lock awakened? Silence. Mara's calm expression finally broke. You know that word? My grandmother made me memorize it before she died. Another pause. She said if humanity ever returned. His voice grew quieter. We were already too late. Serral stepped closer. What is the lock? Neither commander answered. Instead, Eleanor slowly entered the communication chamber. Kale's face lost all color. No, he whispered. It cannot be. The old woman smiled with quiet warmth. You've grown. Kale stared. You know me. I knew your grandmother. The bridge aboard the Judgment of Ashes fell completely silent. Kale looked like a child again. My grandmother said she once met a human. Eleanor nodded. She saved my life. Nobody spoke. Not even Serral. History had just become personal. Eleanor motioned toward an ancient projector resting beside the wall. It looked almost ceremonial. Mara inserted the small metal key. The machine awakened instantly. Dust floated through pale blue light. A recording appeared, static. Then, a man in an old Earth naval uniform. The date displayed beneath him, year 2217. His eyes looked directly into the camera. "If you're seeing this," he smiled sadly. "We failed." The room remained perfectly still. "My name is Admiral Nathaniel Voss." He glanced away briefly. "Humanity found something beneath our own solar system." Every heartbeat seemed louder. "We thought it was an ancient machine." He shook his head. "It wasn't." Another pause. "It was sleeping. Nobody moved. It predates every known civilization. We never built the first walls. We only repaired them." The recording flickered. "Our fleets were never designed to conquer." He looked exhausted. "They were built to guard." The image crackled violently. "If the lock ever awakens." He looked straight into the camera again. "Find the keepers." No explosions, no dramatic music, just silence. Cyril finally found his voice. "Humanity left Earth to stand watch." Mara nodded once. "Not because we lost, because someone had to." Outside, the dead star opened. No fire erupted, no superweapon emerged. Instead, layers of impossible machinery slowly separated like petals around an ancient flower. At their center floated a single sphere of pure darkness. Every scanner failed. Every computer rebooted. Artificial intelligences across both fleets shut themselves down voluntarily. No one understood why. Then the galaxy answered. One signal became thousands. Then millions. Across forgotten nebulae, inside abandoned asteroid fields, buried beneath ocean worlds, hidden within shattered moons, ancient human vessels awakened. 1, 10, hundreds, thousands, then tens of thousands. Exactly. 50,000. No fleet launched, no weapons armed. They simply powered on. Waiting, listening, remembering. Every transmission repeated the same words. Keeper status requested. Civilizations across known space watched in stunned disbelief. Humanity had never disappeared. It had spread itself across the galaxy, not to rule, not to hide, to watch. On the bridge of the Perseverance, Eleanor slowly lowered herself into an old wooden chair. The effort left her breathing heavily. 9 generations rested behind her eyes. She looked toward Mara. "It's time." Mara nodded reluctantly. She didn't want this moment, but she'd known it would come since childhood. A small girl entered the chamber. She couldn't have been more than 12. Dark hair tied neatly behind her head. She carried no rank, no weapon, only a worn leather journal. She looked at Eleanor. "Great-grandmother?" Eleanor smiled. "Come here." The girl obeyed. She placed one small hand over Eleanor's trembling fingers. "This," Eleanor whispered, "is the 9th keeper." Cyril blinked. "The child?" Mara gently corrected him. "No!" The little girl smiled. "Not yet." Eleanor closed her eyes. "My daughter after me." Then hers for 300 years. She looked at the child. "And now," the girl finished quietly, "one day me." The room suddenly became very quiet. Not because anyone chose silence, because something else had entered it. No footsteps, no light, no shape, just presence. Every living being aboard every ship looked up at exactly the same moment. Humans, aliens, children, soldiers, farmers, engineers, even Commander Kale aboard his flagship. A voice spoke, not through speakers, inside every living mind, gentle, curious, almost innocent. "Are you still here?" Nobody answered. The voice continued. "I dreamed for so long." People began crying without understanding why. Not from pain, from overwhelming sadness, as though hearing someone awaken after unimaginable loneliness. Did the little guardians keep their promise? Eleanor smiled through tears. "Yes," she whispered aloud. "We're still here." Commander Kale slowly removed his gloves. His hands trembled visibly. Cyril noticed. "You fought wars," Kale nodded. "I have. You aren't afraid of fleets." "No." "Then what frightens you?" Kale stared at the impossible darkness beneath the dead star. "My grandmother never feared human weapons." He swallowed. "She feared what humanity chose to protect." Across the galaxy, the 50,000 ancient ships slowly changed formation. Not into attack positions, into circles, concentric rings, each perfectly aligned with invisible mathematical precision. Civilian astronomers noticed first. The pattern wasn't military. It was structural, like beams supporting an enormous invisible ceiling. Back aboard the Perseverance, every light dimmed. The voice returned, still gentle, still curious, but weaker now. "Something is wrong." Hairline fractures appeared across empty space itself. Not glass, reality. Tiny glowing cracks spread silently through the vacuum around the dead star. Stars bent unnaturally. Light changed direction, time flickered. One officer watched his chronometer reverse 3 seconds before moving forward again. Another saw 2 shadows beneath his own feet. Children stopped playing. Birds became silent. Even the gardens seemed to hold their breath. Eleanor struggled to stand. Mara rushed forward to help her. The old keeper shook her head. "No." Her eyes remained fixed on the widening fractures beyond the observation window. "The containment," her voice trembled for the first time in centuries, "is failing." Outside, one of the ancient human ships suddenly ignited with brilliant white light. Not from attack, from sacrifice. Its hull dissolved into countless streams of energy that rushed toward the spreading cracks. The fracture slowed, only for a moment. Then another crack appeared, larger, longer, deeper. The voice echoed once more inside every living mind, no longer curious, no longer calm, afraid. I cannot stay asleep much longer. The first fracture split open wide enough for something impossible to begin looking back. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3, The Promise Beyond the Stars. The first fracture widened without a sound. It was not an explosion. There was no flash of fire or violent shockwave. Space itself simply opened, as though reality had become old fabric finally tearing under centuries of strain. Every weapon aboard every ship went dark. Missile locks vanished. Targeting systems failed. Railguns refused to arm. Even the Coalition's most advanced quantum computers displayed the same impossible message. Nova 6 detected. Commander Kale Riss watched the stars bend into impossible shapes outside his flagship. His tactical officer looked at him in panic. "Commander, we've lost every offensive system," Kale answered quietly. "Good," the officer stared. "Sir, if weapons still worked, we'd only make this worse." Aboard the Perseverance, children stood silently beneath the artificial sky of the gardens. The birds had stopped singing. Leaves no longer moved. It felt as though the ship itself was listening. Mara Voss stood beside Eleanor. The old keeper's breathing had become shallow. "The lattice," Eleanor whispered. "It must be completed." Mara already knew. She had known since she was a little girl listening to bedtime stories that were never really stories. They had been instructions, promises, goodbyes. Across the galaxy, 50,000 ancient human ships changed formation. One after another, they aligned into immense concentric rings surrounding invisible anchor points hidden among the stars. No captain gave an order. No admiral directed them. Every vessel simply remembered its purpose. Lights ignited across their hulls, not weapons, beacons. The galaxy suddenly resembled a cathedral made from stars. Commander Cyril watched in awe. They're connecting. Streams of white light stretched from ship to ship. Thousands became tens of thousands. The entire network formed a single impossible pattern, not an armada, a seal. Eleanor smiled weakly. "We were never guarding an enemy. We were holding a door closed." The gentle voice returned inside every living mind. It sounded frightened now. "I don't want to hurt anyone." Nobody answered. The sadness in that single sentence was almost unbearable. Mara closed her eyes. "You won't." Kale looked across his bridge. His fleet waited for orders. These were disciplined soldiers. Many had fought beside him for decades. Some had lost families in wars. Others still carried scars from battles against pirates and rogue empires. They trusted him. He took a slow breath. "My grandmother once told me that courage isn't choosing the winning side." He looked toward the Perseverance. "It's choosing the side that carries the greater burden." His first officer understood immediately. "You want us to help them?" Kale nodded. "If humanity has stood watch for 3 centuries," he looked at the widening fracture, "they should not stand alone today." The bridge remained silent. Then one by one, every officer nodded. Orders spread through 4,000 coalition warships. Not attack formation, support formation. Ships crossed ancient political boundaries without hesitation. History quietly changed course. The containment lattice brightened. Human vessels occupied the inner rings. Coalition ships filled the outer gaps. Energy flowed between both civilizations. For the first time in centuries, humanity was no longer alone. Cyril smiled. "It was never meant to be only your burden." Mara looked at Kale's fleet. "No, it wasn't." Then the first human ship died. There was no explosion. Its lights simply faded. Its ancient hull dissolved into brilliant white particles that flowed into the lattice. The fracture stopped expanding, only for a heartbeat. Then another section widened. A second ship sacrificed itself. Then a third, one after another. Names disappeared from the network. Each loss bought only seconds. Cyril lowered his head. "They're giving their lives," Eleanor answered softly. "They always knew they would." Deep inside the Perseverance, Mara walked alone toward a sealed chamber. No alarms followed her, only silence. The chamber door opened with an old mechanical click. Inside rested a single chair facing a circle of ancient controls. Nothing looked impressive. No glowing crystals, no impossible machinery. Just worn metal polished smooth by generations of careful hands. Eleanor entered behind her. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, Eleanor placed both hands on Mara's shoulders. "There is one truth I never told you." Mara smiled sadly. "I know." Eleanor's voice trembled. "You only know half." Mara turned. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "The fleet isn't the lock." Mara felt her heart sink. "You are." Silence filled the room. The keepers were never guarding the seal. Eleanor gently touched Mara's forehead. "They were raising it." Mara closed her eyes. "So when I begin the final protocol, you become the seal, and I don't come back." Eleanor couldn't answer. She simply embraced her granddaughter. For the first time in 300 years, the ninth keeper cried. Outside, another 100 ships vanished into light. The fractures continued spreading. Coalition cruisers now overloaded their own reactors to reinforce the lattice. Kale watched warning lights fill his bridge. His engineer looked at him. If we continue, I know, we'll lose half the fleet. Continue. Mara walked through the gardens one last time. Children still waited there. Some understood. Most did not. A little boy ran toward her carrying a small wooden toy spaceship. It had been carved by hand, paint worn away from years of play. Captain, she knelt. He held the toy out proudly. I fixed the wing. She smiled through tears. It looks better than before. He frowned. Will you be back before dinner? For a moment, she almost lied. Instead, she gently placed the toy back into his hands. Keep flying it. He nodded. I will. She brushed his hair aside. Promise me something. What? When you finally see Earth, his eyes widened. Run. He laughed. Why? Because grass feels different when you're running. He didn't understand, but he smiled anyway. I promise. Mara hugged him tightly, longer than usual. Then she stood. Without looking back, the final chamber sealed. The ancient controls awakened. One by one, the symbols turned white. Outside, every surviving human ship transmitted the same message. Final Procolacipt. Mara rested her hand on the central console. The gentle voice spoke one last time. I'm afraid, she smiled. So am I. A pause, then her final words. Some dreams exist so others can keep living. She pressed her hand forward. Light consumed the chamber. Across the galaxy, the lattice blazed brighter than 1,000 suns. The fractures stopped growing. Then slowly, they began to close, one line, then another. Reality stitched itself back together. The impossible darkness faded. Stars returned to their rightful places. Time moved forward once more. The presence disappeared, not destroyed, sleeping, safely. The last beam of light faded. The chamber aboard the Perseverance stood empty. Mara Voss was gone. Weeks later, a convoy approached Earth for the first time in 3 centuries. Children gathered at the observation windows. Nobody spoke. The blue planet slowly filled the sky. Many cried without knowing why. It simply felt like home. Landing craft descended through clouds. The doors opened. A little girl stepped onto green grass. She hesitated, then removed her shoes. Her bare feet touched the ground. She smiled. It feels soft. Behind her, her father laughed through tears. Yes, it always did. A simple stone stood beneath a young tree overlooking the sea. No grand monument, no statues, only a name. Captain Mara Voss Commander Kale Reyes arrived alone. He removed the insignia from his uniform, the one his grandmother had once worn. He placed it carefully at the foot of the grave. He stood in silence for several minutes, then turned and walked away without a word. As evening settled across the coast, Commander Sorel remained beside the grave. The wind moved gently through the grass. One of the children approached him. Commander, why did she do it? Cyril looked toward the stars beginning to appear above the horizon. He smiled softly, then gave the answer the galaxy would remember long after empires were forgotten. Because the strongest people are not the ones who live forever. He looked once more at the quiet sea. They're the ones who make sure everyone else can. End of chapter 3.